All right. By the way, if you have questions, please ask. Don't walk out the door going, I have no idea what he just talked about, okay? So ask. If you've got questions, that's all right. That's what we're here for. My good friend Todd he knows this stuff way better than I do, my dad especially. Ask questions. If you have questions, ask them, okay? Last session, one other thing. One of those guys you were looking at, Paul Davies, used to be an atheist, okay? And he is now converted because of all the evidence. These are astrophysicists and microbiologists that you're listening to. I don't want you just to hear from me talking about it and mentioning some names. I want you to hear from the professionals themselves, the experts, okay? And that's what you just saw and heard. All right, so our last session we were looking at the existence of God. How do we know God exists? And in the video you heard from the experts, you heard these guys. What are some of the arguments? What were some of the arguments that we talked about the last time? Or that they even have mentioned? What are some of them? Say it again. Very good. Fine-tuning. Very good. Who else? You don't get candy for free in this class. Only if you answer a question. What else? What are some other arguments? Anything? Well, that's not an argument for the universe, but that's part of what we learned. We're going to go into that review. But you already got it. Anybody else? Huh? Say it again. All causality. What else? Anything else? That's the cause and effect too, by the way. If the universe is present, then something or somebody must have caused it, okay? Very good. What else? Anything else? You can look at your notes, you can look at the board, you can think of what you...
Ontological argument.
Wow, check that out. Good answer. What else? Anything else?
Teleological argument.
Teleological argument. Very good. Good job. What else? Who else?
Gravitational force.
That's one of them. What's that a part of?
The teleological argument.
Teleological argument. Very good. What else? Occam's razor is not, but that's kind of an explanation. Huh? But what's that a part of?
Gravitational force.
What's that a part of? The teleological arguments. Very good. You've got one, so. Anything else? All right, so what about design? That's kind of part of this whole thing we're talking about, these teleological arguments, and many other things. Cause and effect was mentioned. The ontological arguments were mentioned. Anybody remember what these were, besides just reading them and getting a piece of candy? No, okay, we'll review them. That's what we're here for. But there's also philosophical arguments we've talked about as well, okay? So this is a review. We'll look at, not the whole class, but a good part of this first day is review, and then we'll get into evolution, which is where we're going this semester, as well as many other things, okay? Winding up in the last session with aliens, which we'll talk about them in week 5 for sure. There's one chair here. We need 2 more chairs. There's one chair over there. There's one chair there. There you go. There's 2 chairs. There's one up here, Andrew, if you want to come up here. Or you guys just slide down one. Make it easy to get. Lee, slide down one. It's all right to sit in the front. It's all right to sit in the front, all right? So we looked at some reasonable arguments for the existence of God, okay? What is the most basic metaphysical question that we mentioned? What is that?
Why do we have something rather than nothing?
Why do we have something rather? Somebody could read pretty good. That's all you got to do is look at your notes, okay? Why do we have something rather than nothing? It's the most basic question of existence, okay? Why are we here? Why are we here? Why is the earth here? Why is the universe here? Why do we have something rather than nothing? So in considering that question, we gave 4 possible answers as to why we have something rather than nothing. What were the 4 questions? Anybody remember? And not you, because you're reading really well. Somebody else.
Reality is an illusion.
Reality is an illusion. Very good. What else?
Reality was self-created.
Huh?
Reality.
Somebody back there.
Reality was self-created.
Very good. What else?
Reality is
Self-existent.
You can somebody if you don't want. Who else? What else?
reality was created.
Okay, reality was created by something that is self-existent. So there's 4 of them. Reality was an illusion. Reality is or was self-created. reality is self-existent. Or number 4, reality was created by something that is self-existent. So we came into the existence, the universe came to existence a finite time ago out of ex nihilo, or what's known as nothing. It came out of nothing, okay? And we said, how could that possibly be? And those were the 4 possible answers we came across. Reality is an illusion. But after studying this and going into depth, we said, you can't have an illusion of an illusion unless something exists to have it. Just plain logic, okay? So we ruled that one out. Then we said, number 2, reality is or was self-created. And then we said, well, this kind of breaks the fundamental law of non-contradiction, because it would have to be and not be at the same time, okay? It would have to be before it was. Do you follow that? There's a little contradiction there. You see where that comes in. So that gets ruled out. Then we said reality is self-existent, meaning it's eternal. So we showed from a scientific point of view why this cannot be, meaning universes cannot be eternal. Okay? Then number 4 was reality was created by something that's self-existent, or an eternal creator. The 18th century theologian Jonathan Edwards summed it up like this: something exists, nothing can create something. Again, the laws of non-contradiction. By the way, some will try to put something in that it was created out of nothing spot. Okay, they'll say it was created out of nothing, but really they're starting with some kind of law of some sort. Okay, so keep that in mind. They'll say nothing, but that's not really what it is. So therefore, a necessary and eternal something does exist. So notice we always go back to an eternal something. The question is, what is it? An eternal universe or an eternal creator? What is it? So from a scientific standpoint, honest scientists admit the universe had a beginning. If you really talk to a scientist that knows this stuff well, he'll say, yeah, there was a beginning point, and we can see that and show that. In other words, whatever has a beginning had a cause. And if the universe had a beginning, it has a cause. Just like this building. This building hasn't always been here. It had a starting point. There was a purpose for it. There was a cause, okay? So it had a starting point. This is where many of the TV shows that you see, Nat Geo, Science Channel, things like that, this is where they get it wrong because they don't have a proper understanding of the Bible. They make an assumption. They assume God was created. That's a huge and false assumption. Very huge, okay? The concept of aseity. Anybody remember what that was? The concept of aseity. Anybody? And actually, the answer is on the board. I just don't have aseity written on the board. Huh? Self-existence. Here, you give us something. Because you're going to be loaded down like Halloween. Hey, you fucking got it. You didn't even have to answer a question.
Anybody else want it? Here, throw it back over there.
All right. So, what's the difference then between self-creation? Listen, what's the difference between self-creation and self-existence? Are they the same? All right, so we have said why self-creation is illogical and impossible. Remember, it would have to be and not be at the same time, okay? But self-existence idea in its own power violates no principles of logic, none, okay? So we came to the arguments for God's existence called the ontological arguments. We won't look at all these. Again, this is just a review. So we're not going to cover them all, but let's just touch the first one, just for a quick review, okay? And it states, the only way to deny the existence of a necessary being, you have to demonstrate that its existence is 1, nonsensical, and 2, logically impossible. So the argument goes as follows. God's defined as a maximally great or perfect being, kind of like bowling a 300. Paul would know about this. He's a bowler. He stayed up till 3 a.m. bowling last night, and he's here this morning, so with his eyes barely open. But anyways, bowling 300 is perfect, or it's like batting 1,000 for those of you who play ball. You can't get any better than that, okay? So that's kind of what it's like. That's number 1. God is a perfect or maximally great being. Then number 2, the existence of a perfect or maximally great being is either impossible or necessary, since they can't be contingent. Then number 3, the concept of a perfect being is not impossible, since it's neither nonsensical nor self-contradictory. Therefore, a perfect being exists, and a perfect being is necessary. And then the ontological arguments build, okay? But we're not going to go into all of them. That's just the start of the argument. Then we discussed the law of causality, which was mentioned a little while ago, or the law of cause and effect, as some people know it. Does it say that everything has to have a cause? No. Why? What does it say?
Everything that has an effect comes into being.
Say the last part.
Everything that has an effect comes into being.
That comes into being. Right. That's why I only wrote that. So not everything, okay, it doesn't say that everything has an effect. It says everything that has an effect or comes into being has a cause. That's important to realize and remember that, okay? So logically, this rules out self-creation theory that I mentioned earlier because it goes into this infinite regression, meaning how far do you go back until you reach the beginning starting point, okay? Does everybody realize that? There's some point in time you keep going back. When does it start? It goes into an infinite regression at some point. So not only is it possible to have an eternal being, but it is necessary, okay? This is not a God of the gaps argument. Does anybody remember what the God of the gaps argument is or says? Anybody recall that? That means things we can kind of, say it again. Do we have any more handouts? Are we out? There you go. It says, these are some things that can be explained within nature, okay? And people will say, oh, you Christians, you just use God to try to explain everything. But these things happen within nature. That's called a God of the gaps argument. But God is above nature. He's of another dimension. He's outside of nature. So if he's outside of nature, what is he? Supernatural. Very good. I'm not kidding you. But since God is eternal, it does not philosophically or logically break the cause and effect law, nor is it irrational. Keys, remember, the causality point is key. If you don't remember anything else from last quarter, remember the law of cause and effect, and that it comes into being, is how that is affected, okay? Then we talked about chance. You'll hear people say, well, it just happened by chance. Well, this happened by chance, okay? Chance has no influence on the actual event, none, okay? It has no power to influence anything, chance. All it says is it heads or is it tails? And what are the odds of the heads or the tails? Chance does not influence anything. So whenever you hear somebody say, it came into being because of chance, no, chance does not influence anything at all, okay? Then we talked about the mind. Well, what about the mind? There's a lot of talk about that. If we're evolution and it just happened from randomness, how did we get the mind? Well, C.S. Lewis says it like this, pretty good saying. Suppose there was no intelligence behind the universe, says C.S. Lewis. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments that lead to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought. So I could never use thought to disbelieve in God. That's a pretty sharp statement, okay? That's a pretty good thought on the matter, all right? So then we looked at the universe and had at its beginnings and showed some evidence of the laws of thermodynamics, okay? The fact that the universe is expanding, and we saw a lot of this from the Bible. We actually showed this where the Bible talks about physics and laws and science. It can be traced back to a singular point. Remember the infinite regression we just talked about, the evidence for a beginning? Well, this is one of them, one of many. So the first law of thermodynamics, which is in part the law of conservation of energy, says that nothing more was created. Nothing more was created. In Genesis 1, what happened on the seventh day? He rested, right. No more creating was going on. You won't find any more creating going on in the Bible after that. That was it, okay? So the Bible is clear, that's it. Now you might see things in our world that change from one state to another, but as far as original creation, that's it, and the Bible says so, okay? And you won't see it today, anywhere, all right? So the Bible talks about a lot of these things. Physics, like, for example, the universe functions according to fixed laws. You can see this in Jeremiah 33:25. It says, thus saith the Lord, if my covenant, the Lord's covenant, not be with day and night, and if I have not appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth. Those are physics that the Lord's talking about, that he made a covenant. He appointed, okay? So physics and laws. Then we also looked at many theories that are out there, like an eternal universe. We looked at that instead of an eternal creator. Why do they do that, by the way? Back whenever they first discovered, when Penrose and, who's the other guy? Yeah, whenever they decided, they found out that, hey, sure enough, we have all this evidence that we have this starting point. We'll call it the Big Bang. Okay? What did that say to a lot of people out there? Anybody know? It said, wait a minute, that says we had a beginning, and it seems like the Bible says we had a beginning. We don't like that. Okay, that's kind of affirming what the Bible has to say. We don't like that. So we need to do something different. So then they started coming up with other theories about eternal universes, because now we have proof, not just a theory. We have evidence that there was a starting point. Okay? That matches up with the Bible. The Bible says, in the beginning. Okay? So it matched up with it. So they came up with other theories, like the eternal universe, like the fluctuating space-time continuum, like the oscillating universe, and string theory. We discussed all of these in week 4 and refuted them from science, showed why they could not be. Okay? And then we showed why science, why they were illogical. And then we came to the teleological arguments, okay, or design. If you're wondering what that means, it talks about design fine-tuning. Remember the video? They showed a lot of the fine-tuning and talked about it in the video. That's why I said video is important. Pay attention to it. The anthropic principle. Anybody know what that is? It goes along with teleological arguments and the fine-tuning. The anthropic principle. It states that everything had to be precise to extreme measurements and interdependent environmental conditions that are perfect for us, for our survival. It's perfect for us, okay? Meaning they need each other. Everything's balanced on what they call a razor's edge. If you can imagine something being balanced on a razor, it takes extreme precision. That's why they say that. It's perfect for us. So along with design, evidence and biology and other things, these things are known as the fingerprints of God, and we see them everywhere. Hopefully you will see that the only way this world, universe, everything could have come into being was by design by a creator. And if you don't, hopefully you will before we're done talking, and certainly by the end of week 5 if you come to all of them. So we're talking about constants, laws of physics, precise measurements that have to be exactly as they are, or else we would not be here. And we're talking about extreme numbers, very extreme numbers. So astronomers have discovered that these characteristics, these constants that we're talking about, and parameters of the universe and our solar system are so finely tuned to support life that nothing less than a personal and intelligent creator could explain it at all. There's no way. So we gave, talking about last session, we gave about 24 parameters of the universe that have been identified that have to be carefully fixed. Not just to have life as we know it, but life at any time in the history of the universe, at all, ever. Okay? So again, try to recall the video at the start of the class. It's key, because it talked about a lot of those, and you heard from the experts themselves. Okay? Some of the things they talked about: the gravitational coupling constant, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic coupling constant, the expansion rate, which we went into some, and we'll touch on a little bit again today, the entropy level. The point is these are some of the things that have to be precise when we're talking about constants, okay? One example we gave was the expansion rate of the universe. It has to be very, very sensitive. It's got to be fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 55th power. Some of you might say, well, so what? Realize that 10 to the 23rd power is the equivalent of all the grains of sand on all of the seashores. So if you take a tiny, teeny tiny grain of sand, and you think about Myrtle Beach or whatever beach you're familiar with, and you look as far as you can one way and as far as you can the other way, and then think about the Gulf Coast, and then the California coast, and down both sides of Mexico, and all down into South America, then in Europe, all of the oceans, all of the seashores, every grain of sand, that's 10 to the 23rd. That is a huge number. Then you multiply it by 10, and you get 10 to the 24th. 10 times that amount is 10 to the 24th. Okay? The expansion rate is 10 to the 55th power. huge number. Remember this number as we go forward because you'll see how incredible these numbers are. So obviously, a designer, an ingenious designer was involved in all this, okay? Then we gave some evidences for the Earth-Moon type systems, like surface gravity, like axial tilt. What is the axial tilt? Anybody know what the axial tilt is? Huh? 23 is right, point what? 4. 0.4, that's right. And the rotation period, anybody remember what that was? We discussed that. Jessica gave us the answer. I remember this. She said it's 24 hours. Well, she's right. But how fast are we spinning? How fast are we spinning? No. No, but it's a good guess. How fast are we spinning? Anybody take science in here? No. Okay, all right. We are spinning right now, as we're sitting here, 1,000 miles an hour. So we're actually moving 1,000 miles an hour. That's not all. That's just the Earth. And that's going around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. That's how fast we're moving, and we can't even realize it. And guess what? If it wasn't like that, we wouldn't be here. God's plan is incredible. So then we talked about the gravitational interaction with the moon, the magnetic field. Anybody remember seeing that in the video, how it protects us? It's got to be just as it is. By the way, if the Earth was a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger, it would affect that magnetic field. Everything is precise. You may not realize it, but it is. All right? Those are just some of the things we talked about. The gravitational force, 10 to the power of 36. That's this number. Remember, compared to grains of sand, that's huge. The gravitational force. If it were just a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, if that one was right here or right here, we wouldn't be here. We would be floating around in space somewhere, or else we would be crushed. This number is so huge. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure, stretch it across the universe, billions of miles, billions, okay? And you take that tape measure and you move it just 1 inch out of billions of miles. And that's how huge that number is. It's huge. We talk about precision. It is incredible, okay? Rate of expansion. This is how the universe was expanding. And we see this. This is one of the evidences for the beginning. All these are. But if it were off, if you were to change it in one part, in 100,000 million, we would have no universe. We would have no life. It has to be precise. Those are huge extreme numbers, okay? Here's another example of how huge that number is. Go out in outer space, float around like a little spaceman with your spacesuit on so you don't die, you know. Take a dart and just kind of close your eyes and just randomly throw it, and that dart finds its way back to Earth and hits an atom perfectly. That's how huge that number is, this number right here. Incredible. Okay, these things are incredible. Quantum physicist John Polkinghorne, again, you're hearing from a quantum physicist, the relationship between the expansion and contraction forces. This constant has to be so precise that it would be like hitting a bullseye that's 1 square inch from the other side of the universe, 17 million light years away. Hitting a bullseye from that far away. I couldn't hit a bullseye from here to that wall, let alone 17 million light years away. Okay? Oxford professor Roger Penrose, he's one of the guys who discovered the beginning, actually, some of these forces that we're talking about. Describes the universe being generated by random. Okay? He says the number 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. Again, that's not 10 to the 23rd. 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power is beyond human comprehension. He said that is the odds of our universe being created at random. In order for the second law of thermodynamics to be compatible with the universe, and it is because we're here, okay, so it is, it has to be precise to that number. That number is so huge, it would be like writing a 0 on each separate proton, each separate neutron, and then writing a 0 on every other particle in the universe, and it still wouldn't even come close to the size of that number. Precision. It's incredible. It's not a coincidence. It's not by random chance that we're here. So that kind of sums up a very brief review of last quarter. Okay, we went into all these things way deeper. Just a review, okay? So what about the Earth? What about evolution that we're taught? What about those things, okay? That's kind of where we're going this session, just so you know. Now, some of the percentage chances of macroevolution. I gave this number to close, the very last number that I gave you, week 5, the last quarter, I gave this number. Doug acts into the referring of the correct sequence of amino acids, okay? The correct sequence to get a functioning protein. The odds that mutations could cause a functional combination out of many, many possibilities of these amino combinations that happen. To get one functioning protein is 1 in 10 to the 74th power, or 1 chance in 1 trillion, 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 trillion. That number. Just to get a functioning protein, not even a cell. Just one protein. That's how huge the chances are of that coming into existence. And they want us to believe evolution, okay? Here's an illustration of how huge that is. Take a blindfold a man, again, have him search the entire galaxy for one atom. That's how huge that number is. That's the same chances. That makes winning the lottery seem pretty simple compared to those odds. All right, or finding a needle in a haystack. That makes that real easy. All right, say it again.
So they like win the lottery 400 times in a row.
Yeah, every day, 400 straight days. All right, so from the book Skeptics by James Kennedy, he states mathematician Sir Fred Hoyle, scientist, professor at Cambridge, and world-famous astrophysicist Chandra Wickremeshin calculated the possibilities for a single cell to have come into existence by chance. Again, chance doesn't create anything, okay, it just gives odds. By chance would be 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power in years. That's how many years it would take if it could even be possible. That's a time frame. By the way, that's a lot larger than even what the Big Bang Theory says, about 16 to 18 billion years or so ago. Way larger. 40,000th power in years. Okay, Wickremeshin states living systems could not. This is a world-famous astrophysicist, not me telling you this. Okay, you're hearing from the professionals. She says that living systems could not have been generated by a random process within a finite time scale in a finite universe. Life cannot spontaneously begin. It is literally impossible. Okay? We're talking evolution here. Not enough time, not near enough time. 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power in years, let alone billions of years. That is allowed for the Big Bang. So there's not enough time. Darwin thought all of life, including humans, arose from one-celled organisms, okay? But to get from a one-celled organism to a human with at least 1 trillion cells, there has to be many changes. Darwin says these were produced at random. Mutations is what he called it. But in actuality, they have to occur in the right and exact, precise order to happen. Side note on mutations, because we're going to talk deeper about those in future weeks. It shows that almost all mutations take away from something. It doesn't add information to it. It makes it worse, not better. So it makes the cell worse if it mutates, not better. Okay? It doesn't do any good to give an organism a leg until it has a nervous system to move it and to control it. Okay? So just a few things about mutations. Anybody know what the enzyme is? Anybody know what an enzyme is? Okay, the enzyme is the building block of the gene. And that is the building block of the cell. For the enzyme to come into chance, we're not even talking about the cell. We're talking about just the enzyme. Okay, these are some staggering numbers. In order for it to come into chance by random, calculated by Bikram Singh, Applied Mathematics, Cardiff and Wales, would be 10 to the 40,000th power. Compared to this number, impossible. You can't even comprehend it, or even write enough zeros down to achieve it. Okay? These are just some of the numbers by these molecular biologists and astrophysicists. So are you starting to see why I say macroevolution is impossible? We're going to go into why these numbers are so huge in upcoming weeks, but just some of the numbers off the top. It's impossible, literally. Okay? Origin of life. Here's an interesting one. If you take a simple cell, a living cell, already functioning, already fully formed, a living one cell, and you were to break every chemical bond within it and lay it out on a laboratory table in perfect laboratory conditions, not in the primordial soup where it has to go through these mutations that take away from, not add to, but in a laboratory, perfect conditions, already fully formed and functioning. Break it apart, lay it on the table, the chance for it to reassemble on its own, calculated by Dr. Harold Morovitz, a molecular biologist, is 1 chance in 10 to the 100,000 millionth billionth power. And that's for a cell that's already formed and functioning, ready to go. But yet they want you to believe that these evolved from primordial soup and did all that. Okay? Question for you. Is evolution false or fact?
Depends on your definition.
Say it again?
Depends on what you're talking about.
Ah, this man knows a little something. Depends on what you're talking about. So, it's a trick question. It's a trick question. Here's why. First of all, find out what type of evolution you are talking about. Because this is where they get you almost every time, okay? They will give you examples of microevolution and then say, see, it has to be. We see it happening, microevolution. Because microevolution can be observed. And then they roll in macroevolution, some of these numbers we've been talking about, and say, see, it's got to be true. So there's different types. By the way, how many types of evolution are there? Anybody know? Anybody know? Some say up to 6. But the main 2 we're going to concentrate on, because some of the others kind of roll into the other different types, are micro and macro evolution. Okay? Micro is also known as divergent evolution. Okay? There are changes within like kinds. Okay? We do see this happening, like the Galapagos finches. Anybody ever heard of that? On the island, okay, very good. We do see those finches changing and adapting, not mutating, watch the words, adapting to their environment, but they are of like kind, okay? So we do see that. The Bible says like kind. Keep in mind, Darwin came along and said species. Huge difference between like kinds and species. You got to keep those straight. We're going to give an example here in just a second. Let's take a test. Even a 5-year-old will pass this, so who wants to volunteer?
I'll do it.
All right, very good. We have a taker. All right. Looking at this chart, which one doesn't belong?
Banana.
Which one doesn't belong?
D.
What'd you say?
D.
All right, very good. Pretty good. You were worried about that for a minute there, weren't you? Now, but realize this. These A, B, and C are of a like kind. But some will say these are different species. So you see the difference between Darwin's definition and the Bible's definition. Like kind and species aren't necessarily the same. However, it's pretty obvious that D doesn't belong, okay? Genesis 1:12, the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind. Genesis 1:24, the living creature after its kind. So this is where it gets kind of sneaky, because species are not necessarily like kinds. When dogs, corn, whatever, when they crossbreed, they don't add information. They don't produce, they do produce the same kind of plant or animal. The information for this variation, as they call it, was already present. Okay? No new genetic information was added, just scrambled. Okay? Dogs don't learn how to fly. Okay? Crossbreeding corn produces corn. You won't see cows popping off the corn stalk. Okay? So keep that in mind. Next week, we'll get into Darwin's Tree of Life. Everybody's heard of that and probably have learned about that. And also how and where we got to where we are today with evolution. If all this is impossible and everything I've showed you is true, how did we get to where we are? Okay? So the how and why we got to where we are with evolution today. Okay? If it's not true, then why are we here? All right?